testing the game timer, which means I'm just sitting here for a minute. Oops, gotta click into that. Sitting here for a minute, waiting for it to see if the minutes part will display correctly. It does. It displays, okay. Now I'm ready to begin. Hi, welcome to the video on user interfaces in Unity. This is a very basic introduction, and the UI gets complicated pretty quick, but we're going to just get a broad familiarity with approaches. Using user interfaces in Unity is not easy. It's difficult, and it's overwhelming because it works on its own rules and its own systems that are new and different than how we've been using Unity so far. But let's break down this large thing into smaller pieces and smaller problems, and then just focus on one of those at a time, acknowledging the others, and that and just going one step at a time. So there are a few challenges with UI that I want to focus on. The first is getting our game data into the user interfaces and doing it in a way that doesn't trip us up. For example, if the player has a health bar at the top and they have a health variable that their component has, then maybe we just have the player tell the UI, hey, my health is here. And when it changes, it goes, hey, my health changed. But then if we delete the health bar, like we move into a cutscene or you're out of combat in an RPG or something, and we just remove that health bar, now the player's like, hey, oh, no reference exception. I have no health bar to talk about, right? So how we hook the UI, which we want to sort of be able to put onto our game and take off of our game and move around and attach it to the game data that we also want to be able to delete and move around. That is challenge number one. Challenge number two is the opposite, is when the user interface isn't reflecting data from our game, but is providing data to our game. How do we respond to user events like pushing a button? Usually pushing a button. It's mostly buttons. Sliders, very good. So getting data into the UI, getting data out of the UI. And lastly, the biggest challenge for beginners and for someone new to the system is just arranging the interfaces, because it's honestly kind of an annoying system to work with. That's the truth. It's not similar to other user interface systems in the world, such as HTML and CSS for doing layouts. And you can't draw layouts in a way that you could if you were using like InDesign or something. And that's unfortunate. So this video is just going to go over the basics of getting data into UI, getting data out of UI, and arranging layouts. That's all we're going to cover. Are you ready to get started? Let's jump into it? No, we're not ready yet. There's actually 3 different user interface systems that are built into Unity. That's right, 3 of them. We're only going to talk about one, or learn about one, but we need to be aware of the other 2. So the first is ImGUI, or Immediate Mode Graphical User Interface. And ImGUI is the tool that Unity uses to display Unity. So if you're writing an editor extension and an editor tool and not your actual game, you might be using ImGUI. The second is UGUI, or Unity UI. GUI is when I say GUI. And that is the game object system that is the default package for user interfaces that we're going to be covering here, that uses game objects to hold everything. And then the last is this new one called UI Toolkit. So we have ImGUI, UGUI, and UI Toolkit. And UI Toolkit uses a CSS-like approach and an HTML-like approach to define things, but it's not really quite ready yet. So we can open up the manual page that I just had open but closed. Fun. I was prepared. Okay, Unity has a page that compares the differences between them, and we can see for in-game actual user interfaces, we should be using Unity's UI system, but for editor extensions, we should be using ImGUI, but their new toolkit system is designed to be able to do both. It's just not ready yet. So anyway, lots of interesting things like the ability to have theming and to have sort of your layouts and your themes kind of be separated. Oh gosh, that would be great. Cascading styles, right? It's not a thing. So anyway, it's not. They're not done yet. They're still working on integrating it with the new input system. They're still working on like an event system, serialized events like the Unity events. Research. What does that? It means we'll think about it. So anyway, it's not lots of things that are planned right at the time of at 2021.2 on this manual. So the first step in our UI is to sketch out what our UI is going to look like, because Unity's system doesn't let us just draw directly. We need to sort of have a plan. We need to not sort of have a plan. We need to directly have a plan in place before we get started. And when we have that plan, that's going to make life much, much easier. So step one is just to draw it out. Let's head to the whiteboard. I have a cat in the chair that is at my whiteboard, so I'm going to just squat here. Okay, can't disrupt the cat. So our game is going to have, it's a little Sokoban game. We're going to have a little block and we're going to move around. We're going to have a heads-up display on the bottom that is going to have our undo button and our reset level button, and it's going to have our timer of how well you are doing. So our entire UI is going to be this little bar on the bottom that we care about. No matter what your screen resolution is, the timer will stick to the right edge and the undo and redo will stick to the left edge, because I just decided. So we can change the screen resolution, and we want our UI to reflect those changes. We're also going to have a main menu, and that's going to be a vertical list of our buttons, and it's going to be start game, level select, and quit or how to play or something. I don't know, maybe nothing. And then level select, we're not going to do. But what I would do is probably just do it all in a grid. Something like that. Shows you all your levels. Grays it out if you completed. But we're not doing that. That's not in scope of this. So we're only going to have a start game button on the menu, but we're going to make it anyway to demonstrate things. So heads up display and start button. When we win the game, I want the entire screen to tint a color, and I want it to be like, to give me like a little congratulations, and then tell me how long it took and how many turns it took. And there's no lose state in the game. You get stuck and you reset. So like level complete, maybe animate that, maybe play a little fanfare. So that one is also out of scope of this video. But we will do that later. We just have to make our game states work, which is a different topic, and I plan on using this project to do multiple videos. So heads-up display, menu. Pretty common, and I think a good place to get started for learning UI tools. So let me move this back. Hello, and here, and huzzah. So if you have not seen this project before, and I don't know what order these videos are coming out in, this is a very basic Sokoban game that supports undos, which is one of the main topics about it. Ooh, hello. I forgot to get rid of debug.logs. I was testing my timer. I think I put that in the beginning of the video. I was testing my... Okay. I wanted to make sure the minutes was appearing correctly. And then how do you test that? You wait a minute. Okay. Probably could have written the code to like accelerate the timer and then, or just set the starting time to not 0, and then changed it back in less than a minute. Tested it and changed it back. Anyway, so that's our game. Where should we start? With the heads-up display or the main menu? I think the main menu makes more sense to start with, because that's going to be its own scene. So we're going to use we're going to make a new scene from scratch. Call it main menu. Great. Main menu. And I am gonna put an object in this scene, even though we're going to delete it. I just want it there for a demonstration. So to create a user interface in Unity, everything is in the UI system is going to be a child of a canvas component. So I have an option to make any and all of these things. but they're all going to be a child of Canvas. And we're not going to use the new UI Toolkit, so we can ignore UI Toolkit. We're using UGUI, Unity UI. So let's make just the text the name of the game. I have two text components built into Unity. One is called text, one is called text mesh pro. As you can see by this legacy fold-out dropdown, Unity is trying to phase out text and push everyone into text mesh pro. Text mesh pro was originally developed by like a third party, and they sold it on the asset store, and everyone bought it because it was better and just great. And Unity's like, well, that's better and great. How about instead of us spending all of our development time fixing our system to be as good as yours, why don't we just buy yours? Which is good? Troubling? Who knows? I think good. Good for me, because now we just have a good system that's free. Unity letting developers do all the work and then just buying their stuff is, I mean, if they pay a good price, it should be good. I don't know. I don't have strong opinions about that. So anyway, we added Text Mesh Pro. If you've never added a Text Mesh Pro component in your scene before, you're going to get a little pop-up that says you need to import TMP Essentials. And you do that, and it's going to put a folder in your root directory called Text Mesh Pro, which I find annoying, but I mean, it is much better than the text component, so it's fine. I think you can move that, but that's not. So where's our UI? It's missing, it's gone. What is going on here? I can see it in my game view. I can see my text I've created down in the corner. But in my scene view, all I have are these new lines. Well, what's happening is that our canvas component, which is our parent object, is defining a new space, a new 3D space, a new coordinate system that our user interface is displayed in. And it is a space of pixels. We are using a constant pixel size. So we are going to define our game in pixels, and that's our unit that we're going to work off of. So something might be 100 pixels wide. In the scene view, we're going to display, and the scene knows how to display, one unit is one unit. So each of these units is 1 pixel, which means to see my text, I have to zoom out. I have 2 spaces that are using different units, and the scene view is just displaying them both on top of each other, which can be annoying. Remember that you can select an object and press the F key to focus on it, and if I wanted to go back to my game, I could press the F key and I would get back to this world. Another reminder is that we can turn on and off our layers with this little hidey block, and by default, our canvas will be on the UI layer. So if I hide my UI layer when I don't need to look at it, I won't have those annoying lines cutting through my scene. And then a new feature in more recent versions of Unity is I can just hide the canvas game object in my hierarchy. Okay, so let's grab our text, let's press F, and let's discover where we are. I'm actually going to delete the text. You can leave that there if you're following along, but I'm going to delete it and show you everything in a panel, because panels make life a little bit easier to describe because we're working with rectangles. And the Text Mesh Pro has its own like another rectangle inside of the rectangle, so a little bit simpler. So we don't have the transform component anymore. We have this new transform component called Rect Transform, and the way rects are defined are with with 2 properties: a position, so a x and a y position in 2 dimensions. I mean, it's got z too, but we don't use it much. A position and a width and a height, and that with that information we can define a rectangle. That's a rect stands for rectangle. You get it. But position, width, and height allows us to define our rectangle. But I can also define my rectangle not as a position, but as a distance away from an edge, which is weird. So what's going on here? Zero that back out. What's going on here is Unity uses an anchor system to position its rect transforms. So every rect transform is going to have an anchor, and that anchor is actually 4. It's actually 4 anchors, 4 positions in the larger rectangle that this rectangle is inside of. So it is positioned relative to its parent rectangle, and everything in Unity's UI is going to be rectangles. Even if your UI is circular, it's going to be defined inside of a square. Our 4 positions are these little well, if I zoom in, they just get smaller, but these little triangle things here that define the top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right of how against which I am going to position myself. So if I just change this to center positioning, you see that all of those 4 points are 1 point, and my position is going to be defined as a distance away from that point. So I can change my position and my width and height, and I will always be this distance away from my point. If I change my scene, my entire game view here, if I change which changes the preview canvas, you'll see that this position here, where I am positioned off of that blue circle, is always the same distance away from that white, those 4 triangles, whatever you call that shape. Star? Inverted star? I don't know what you call that shape. So that distance never changes. What this allows us to do is define our parent object, is to use our parent object to position our child object. So let's say I want to position myself against the bottom of the screen, like my heads-up display. I could move my anchor to the bottom of the game window and set my position to be 0, and now no matter how I move and scale the game window, I am always going to be I'm positioned against that bottom. I could also be positioned against the left edge. And this should be immediately clear, not immediately clear, but immediately, like, something should click into place, like, okay, we're going to use for objects that are going to be centered on the screen, we'll just position the anchor in the center. For objects that are going to be like a heads-up display at the top left or the top right, we can move our anchor to the top left or the top right. So if you remember your anchor as a single point, that makes life very easy and very simple. I'm just going to position my anchor where I want my object to appear in my game's frame, and then I'm going to position myself away from that, however much. That's it. That's how we use UI. So if I make a new panel, and we'll give this one a different color, and we'll have it be positioned against the bottom edge. We'll just change its size here, move it to over there, but we'll position it as a distance away from that bottom, and then the parent is a distance away from its top, which is the canvas. You can see that as I move my parent object, or as I move the canvas, the parent object moves with its anchor, and the child object moves with its anchor there. And if I were to rescale the child object, I have 2 child objects. The white panel, the red panel would move with it because its anchor of the white panel is moving, or the red object's anchor is the position on the white. I'm fumbling over the words. But this can lead to some trouble. We're just going to make some panels that are children objects of each other, and wiggle them around. Okay, let's delete these panels and go back and make our text. So we want our text to appear centered in the screen and in the top section of it. No matter how I proportion, I want to be sort of 2/3 the way up, centered, something like that. To do that, I'm going to take my anchor and I'm going to just position it against the center and set my X position to 0 and my pivot to 0.5. Ooh, what's pivot? So if anchor is the position on the parent game object that I'm defining my distance away from, pivot is the position of me in my object that I am defining my position of. And it is a number between 0 and 1. I think it can be negative, why not? But it probably should just be a number between 0 and 1, where 0 is the left edge, 1 is the right edge for X, and of whatever percentage of your rectangle. And for y, 0 is the top and 1 is the bottom, which is super annoying to remember. So if I move my pivot to the top left, and I move my anchor to the top left, then I should just be able to type 0, 0. And did I do it back? I did the y backwards. It's bottom left, not top left. So that pivot should be 1. And then if I make my position 0, 0, now my pivot is 0 pixels away from its anchor, and I am good. And that makes these numbers easy to work with. If my pivot is the default value of 0.5, 0.5, then I need, you know, if I zero out top left, I'm in the middle of the top left, and then I like move it, and I don't know, then I change my height. Later I decided to change my height, and I have to move it again, and that makes life hard. So I want the top left of myself to be the top left of the game, then I should set my position to be, if bottom left is 0, 0, then it should be 0, 1. Okay. And then I can have nice, clean numbers to work with. And then these numbers will just be like the margin or the padding. But I don't want 0, 0. I want to be in the middle. So let me use my anchor presets, which are also just 0, 1s, percentages. But we can click this little icon, which gives you the presets. That will change 0.5, 0.5. And now I'm against the center. Position X is 0, and I should be, well, I'm not centered. I'm on the left edge. So I should set my pivot to be centered. Position X 0, and boom, I'm centered. The text isn't centered, but the rectangle that defines my position of this object is centered. And then for Y, I'm just going to move that up a bit. And we'll make ourselves wider and taller. And now I can see here my rectangle looking good. If I grab that rect tool, looks like how I want my object to be positioned. Now that it's positioned, I'm going to go to my Text Mesh Pro and change the text alignment to be centered. And centered. And then I can change my game name and the font size. Great. If I make it too big, it'll be floppy, but I'll make sure my rectangle's the right size that I want it to be. Let me delete that object, and let's add a new UI element, a button. Couldn't find it for a second. And what's the width of my text? The width is 430. Let's make that a nice even number, like 450 and 150. And let's make the button have the same width, 450 and bigger. Big buttons. Everyone loves big buttons. You need the buttons. Why not have a giant button? Make that text bigger. Auto size. Nice. Thank you, Text Mesh Pro. Start game. There we go. And if I go into play mode, excellent. I can now position my game. As long as I don't make it too small, it will be fine. But what if I do want to make it too small and I want everything to shrink in accordance? Well, we can do that. It's in the canvas settings, and it's this property called canvas scaler. Currently it's set to constant pixel size. We can change it to scale with the screen size, or we can change it to always be the same real size after all the display rendering stuff. Scaling with the screen size is nice. It means we're now working inside of a reference resolution, so it's going to tell all the UI components, hey, this is your resolution that you are calculating against, and then the scaler will like take that and then blop and scale it. So should the height always match, and it should scale with height, or should the width always match, and it doesn't scale with height, but it scales with width, or should we find some middle ground? I actually think width is fine, and I think the defaults are probably fine too. So, great. So change with scale with screen size, and I think for me width feels right. Go to my game view, let's see what it looks like at 16 by 9. Doesn't look great. I want that text to be a little bit lower. Let's try 16 by 10, full HD, 4K. It's all the same aspect ratio, so. Cool. We made a menu. We can go to the main camera and change that background color to black, whatever. That's how you would do that. That's it. That's our main menu. We're going to be using the center point to scale off of, or to position off of. Let's make our new heads-up display. So let's go to any of our scenes. I only have one sample scene, and I already made a little undo button here and a canvas. But let's go ahead and delete that because that was just for testing. So I can go through and show you how I would go about making this. This part you're probably not following along on, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Under UI, we're going to make a new canvas, but we don't need to make the canvas. We can just make an element and it'll make the canvas for it. It will also, when we do that, it will also make a thing called an event system and put that in our project. So what do I have? I have an undo button, a redo button, and the timer. So let's make and I have the entire panel. Let's start with the panel. When I make a panel, by default, it's not using a single point for its anchor. It's using a square for its anchor, which is stretching. I want the panel to stretch with the width of the game, but I don't want it to stretch with the height. So I'm going to change my anchor preset to be anchored against the bottom, but left and right. And that's going to move my little presets like that. It's going to move them around, little anchors. And you can see left, right, and position Y. When these points are touching, I get a number to go off of, but when they are not touching, I get top and bottom. I get a distance away from the edge to go off of. And as I choose these anchor presets, my little shortcuts here will update. It'll always recalculate it so it doesn't actually change the UI, but that's good to know. So I did it. So my panel, I'll rename that to HUD, and I don't know, should it be opaque? I think it should be like a deep navy blue. It's not navy. No, I actually hate that. Let's pick the player color. I think I hate that too. I also don't like its rounded edge. I'm going to grab a square and just make it flat. Aha! Didn't like that default. This could be any image. This could be a look at the checkbox getting all stretched out. Square, whatever. And we'll position it to be a height of 30, height of 30, position 60. Ooh, I don't like that. I want its Y position to be 0 and its height to be correct. So I need to change the Y pivot to 0. Then its height is 0, and now that's correct. And now that's the distance the bottom edge is away, because I moved the pivot to 0. Why is it showing up as not? Why is it there? Is it because of the tool? I feel like that preview's not right. Next, I'm going to go to my canvas, and I'm going to change it to scale with the screen. Same as before, so that if my game got smaller, my heads-up display would always take up the same. Actually, maybe I don't like that. No one's going to play like this, but you need the text to be at least so many pixels tall, so we're going to go with constant. If you play on a huge screen, it's going to be a very small ball. It's not going to scale up, but I think that's fine. Okay, so now as a child of the HUD, we need to have our buttons positioned on the left and the timer positioned on the right. For the timer, that's going to be a text field, and I'm going to make it right aligned, the little rectangle, and anchor it against the right middle. And position my X pivot to be the right edge, so I can position it at 0, 0, and I'm where I want to be. And then I can use that for margins. Change this to be centered, and we'll put some placeholder of what the timer should look like. We'll auto size to scale up to match, probably match the height. Width doesn't need to be that much. Shrink the width. Be very careful using these yellow bars. This is the Text Mesh Pro thing, which allows you even more control. I want you by default to position a panel and then get the panel positioned correctly in Unity. And now let's going to do the same for 2 buttons. And the buttons we're going to position against the left edge. So left middle for our anchor, left edge for the right button, position 0, plus maybe 20 pixels over, width of 100, height, whatever. We could probably position it, scale it off of the bar. How about that? And then our height can just be the margins. That's easier to work with. And this will be the undo button. And then the child object is the Text Mesh Pro. We'll call it undo. You see the child object just scales to the size of the button. Position 0, scale 0. That makes perfect sense. That's how we want that to look. We can even make the auto size. And then we'll duplicate that and call this one redo button. And I'm just going to move it over. Because they're both positioned off the left edge, so they should never like overlap with each other. And we'll change that text to, sorry, restart, not redo. I don't support redo. Restart. Cool. That way you will accidentally click the restart button trying to press undo. It's a great user interface. And you can see I'm constantly like wiggling my UI, my game view around, and I have both my game and my scene view open. I'm just trying to catch, you know, if it gets too thin, that's going to break. I think that's fine for now. Looks good to me for now. You know, if I'm targeting WebGL and I'm out of a fixed size of my canvas, then I should probably change my canvas to be, you know, just match that, but we're not going to. So anyway, I'm positioning objects. I'm remembering to set my pivot where it makes the most sense, set my anchor where it makes the most sense, so I have the easiest numbers to work with. That's my 101 advice for Unity's UI system. Let's move on to getting data into and out of the user interface. So like, pause and restart. To get data into the user interface, I probably need a script on that object that is going to update the UI element with the data that it gets from somewhere else. So this little intermediary middleman script thing. So for that, we're going to have on the timer, we're going to grab our game time and update it. So let's write a new script. I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and I'm going to make a new folder called UI. I'm going to go into my UI, and I'm going to make a new script. I'm going to give it the prefix UI, and I'm going to call it UI timer text updater. I guess if it's the prefix UI sort of implies that it's the timer text, it's the timer text. UI timer text, sure. I like to have that UI prefix on this script. So here we go. So now we're in the code. We need to, this script is going to exist on the timer text. It's going to exist on the timer. The same component that has the Text Mesh Pro component. We can go ahead and add it. UI timer text. Which is good, right? So it's just going to be able to grab this component and update it with the data that it needs to get put into the system. So let's grab a reference to the Text Mesh Pro component. We will make your gut instinct is to grab text, unityengine.ui, but that's actually the legacy text component that is still in Unity. Oh, it's gonna break. Is still in Unity. We don't want that. Instead, we want to add Text Mesh Pro. Nope, still wrong. Not correct. Still wrong, still wrong. Another just common pitfall that I see students, just take a good guess. And I want you to take good guesses. Don't just watch YouTube videos, just try. We want the TMP underscore text component in the Text Mesh Pro namespace. We have Text Mesh Pro underscore text. Because it turns out, and we'll call that text. It turns out there's lots of different properties that Text Mesh Pro, different classes that Text Mesh Pro has created, and the text component is just one of them. And we're going to initialize that in awake, and we're going to do a little require component. And that require component asset or attribute is going to mean if I try to remove the TextMesh Pro component, can't remove TextMesh Pro GUI script because UI timer text depends on it. It doesn't, it forces this script to have that script. You'd have to remove them in a different order, which I don't want to do. Whoops, don't know what that is. UI timer text. So now I need to get the game's timer code. I need to get the timer, the game timer. I made a timer script. I made a timer object called timer that handles all the logic of timing the game, and I had some comments that explain how the string formatting works, but I have a function on a game timer class that is actually the data I want. And it is stored in the game manager. So I'm going to need a reference to the game manager, where my actual data I want. Game manager.score.timer. Whatever it is I want. We're going to use a game manager. We're just going to use that reference right there. And then we need to update the script. Let's do it the hard way by just setting the, another common mistake is to try to set the text correctly. Because you made a variable name called text, but this is actually the text component, and we want the text property of the text component. So if you named your TextMesh Pro text, we want the text.text, which is confusing there to look at, but we just always got to keep our data types in mind. This is a TextMesh Pro, object reference. This is a string text property I can edit, and that is quite literally it's this box. I'm changing the text that appears in this box. Text. And we're going to set it to GameManager.getTimer, which is just a function I wrote that give me the timer. .getTime. And we're just going to do that every single frame and update. Why not? Because it's silly and stupid, but and I have an error. My error is that my game manager needs to be assigned here. This project is not using the singleton pattern. I have not given myself an easy way to access the object of which I assume there's only one thing. So I have to go to my managers, grab my game manager, and drag it into that slot. For what it's worth, this object, this manager's object that's going to be on every single scene, it would make sense to make this a prefab, and it would make sense to make the canvas a prefab, and it would probably make sense to just have this one levels data object that has everything, and then I can have those references assigned once. The other way to do it that I think makes more sense, because I just don't like giant prefabs, is to make the canvas a prefab, managers a prefab, and then have either the canvas contain an object that can find the references to everything and tell all of its children objects, like the timer text, what their dependencies and what their elements are. So you have some UI parent object that turns things on and off and handles the switching of states and sets dependencies, and and then we just make the references there. Or the singleton pattern, where the timer text can just reach out into the scene and say, hey, give me the game manager that we care about, and we would get it. But because this game is very simple, I can just drag and drop. And then I'll make my prefabs, drag and drop, duplicate a scene to start a scene. I'll have all my references going. It's fine. If I get an error, I'll see it in the console. I'll click on it, and it'll go, oh, oop, I'll click, I'll drag, I'll drop. Not the worst thing in the world. All right. Let's hit play. The timer does not, I added this feature, the timer does not start until your first move. So you can sit there and think how it happens. The game wins, the timer doesn't stop because we haven't done any of the game state stuff yet, but there we go, it's updating. We're going to leave that in the update function for now. In the future, we would use an event system. I would add some events on the text to be like 1 second. The timer, the text would have changed and it would update everything. just to make it a little bit more efficient. But honestly, for a timer, checking every frame isn't that bad. For some other things, checking every frame would be a pain in the butt. So, you know, it makes sense. I mean, the timer is going to change all the time. So we can live with that for now. So that's getting data into the Text Mesh Pro script. I highly recommend making a intermediary script with the prefix UI that directly references our thing we want and can get data about it and have it reach out and find the managers that it needs and update the text. As opposed to in the manager having that get set well, my game's code's broken. Instead of having that text be set and then setting that text.text equal to timer.prettytime or whatever. Because now if you do it that way, where your game manager and your player and everything reaches out to the UI, now everything is dependent on that UI existing. But if you create this sort of middleman script that allows that it reaches out and tells the text what to do, and it like looks out and looks for the game manager, and these dependencies go in that direction on a graph, then I could take my entire canvas and delete it, and my game would just still work. Oh, I can't stress how much that is a really nice thing to be true about your game, is for you not to have a dependency on the existence of the canvas or the UI. We like that. We want that to be the case. That should be the case, in my opinion. Because we're going to be, you turn on and off the heads-up display. Like if I pause the game, I turn that off. Well, now if I'm telling the timer to update all the time and it's like not even turned on, you know, things get weird. That wouldn't be a null reference, but like if you're calling a function or something, nothing's happening and it's not hooked, the wrong thing isn't hooked into the event system because it's disabled. I don't know. Things break. Okay. So data into the UI system, it makes life a little bit easier for ourselves to make intermediary scripts that update various components. Sometimes you can generalize these. If you're using like a scriptable object data-driven approach, you could have, ooh, that's good. Oh, but not this video. Okay, so let's make a prefab for our canvas and for our managers. And we could even put the canvas in the manager. Well, we can't do that from here. We're going to open the managers. Not important. Event system. Event system is when we make a canvas, it makes an event system object. If I go to where my scenes and my main menu, hey, that's there too. And the event system is how Unity gets events in and out of the UI system. It responds to these buttons in our input system. So if I were to delete my horizontal axis and my vertical axis or rename it, which I very well may do, in the old input system, if I were to just get rid of the ones I don't need, then then everything would break on my canvas. So basically, all you need to know is that this game object it created needs to exist in order for the camera's button presses and everything to exist. And for me to push the arrows and to use keyboard input to navigate between buttons, but that's not in the scope of this video. But Unity will by default try to support keyboard navigation. Does it automatically. Visualize, you can see I've got up and down arrows. It's gonna, if I push down, it's like you're below me, you go down, it's like that one, press space, that means you click it, click up, you go to this one. It's a really powerful system. But it's just so hidden away in Unity that it's a pain in the butt to use. Anyway, how do we get button presses out of Unity? The easiest way to do it is to manually configure it. I know! We have a game object called a level manager. And level manager has, it doesn't have many scripts on it. It has a restart function that we're going to need to make public, and a go to next level function that we're going to need to make public. These are the functions that we're going to use. I want to call these functions when the button is pressed. Well, I could make that intermediary script that I have the button press call, and then it will reach out to another thing and call it. But in this case, it wouldn't actually change anything about the dependencies in my game, because I still am going to do, in that case, I would still do the following, which is I'm going to add an on-click event. Ooh, Unity events, serialized event functions. Ooh. I can go in there and I can find my level manager, and I can just hook that up to go to the next level. And that particular level manager requires the build settings. This is not in the scope of this video. It requires that to be the first level. It's going to increase this number and look for the next one. So that next one needs to be in the build settings, but that function will get called when I click the button. It didn't work. I mean, the function probably got called, but it didn't go to the next level. It reloaded the current level. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? This should be 2, 0, 1, 2. Well, let's just debug it. I'm going to pause recording. I found the bug. The plus plus operator increases this, but it did it in the wrong order. It set current equal to that, and then it didn't. You know, I'm even getting a little. Right, like it didn't do anything. I want to set it equal to 1 more than whatever this value is, and then assign that to here. Okay. Huzzah! It worked as it should. Let's go to our sample scene here, and let's check out our undo system. Our undo button, that is a feature built into one of our managers. So having these canvas and managers all talking to each other, again, it would make sense to make this all one prefab and just set it up once. But my turn manager has a public function called undo that we will call. And my restart function, we already know that one. That's in my level manager, has a little function called restart. Undo, undo, restart. Should the timer keep going if you've restarted the level? Not important for this one. Should your timer count your total restart? That's a interesting question. I don't like game timers in my puzzle game. I just thought it was a good example, so I don't really care about the answer in this case. But that is, I think, everything I want to talk about, plus a little bit of extra watching me fiddle around and set things up. Let's put this event system in our managers. Let's open our managers. Let's add our prefab, our canvas here. And let's get rid of this one. Yeah, so the player just needs to find the turn manager when the game begins. And other than that, all of our dependencies can be set in prefabs. So I can make a new level with my grids and objects with a new scene, drag this object in it, have a camera in it, be good to go. What did you do? Oh, when I moved my, when I changed this around, I lost the reference. But the point was to have the reference because it's all in one prefab. I can't apply that to the canvas prefab, but that's in the manager's prefab. Sub prefabs, child prefabs. Not something we tend to do in Unity because it's a new feature and everyone learned to avoid it. But it's actually, in this case, quite nice. Yay. Now I want to rename that to like scene static instead of managers. Anyway, look at that, I'm 10 minutes under time. 10 minutes under time. What did I forget to cover? I don't know. Canvas, event system, panels. Layout groups, maybe? That's not in scope. Top left is green. And its pivot will be its top left position, 0, 0. We'll change its width to be smaller. Red, we're going to do top centered. And its pivot will be centered on the horizontal and the top of the vertical, so its position can be 0, 0. We'll make it we'll make green smaller than red to be visually clear. And we'll make red actually red. And let's make that bottom left. Change pivot, change position. Nice. Nice, right? Everything is just these descending blocks. The big trip up that you can get with canvases, in my opinion, is negative positions, where you position an object how you want them to be positioned, like visually, like you just drag a. I clicked the wrong thing. You just position everything how you think you want it to be positioned, without paying attention to the like hierarchy or of everything, and then suddenly the game loads and we move our objects around and nothing quite behaves. It only works at like one resolution. It doesn't scale the way we want it to, and nothing works the way we want it to. So we just have to super remember to pay attention to our positions, and when possible, avoid negative numbers. I mean, sometimes you're just, I don't mean negative numbers, I mean like being outside of your parent. We want things to be large enough that we can move, you know. I mean, obviously here I want my, you may have a negative number if you're positioned against the center and you're to the left. That's negative, right? And it's not negative numbers that are the problem. It's being positioned outside of your parent and then forgetting that it's parented and then nothing working the way you want it to. But if you keep things inside of the parent object, and you just keep in mind your anchors and use your pivots to help you to make these numbers easy to edit, then life gets nice and good and easy. But if you make life hard for yourself by taking shortcuts and not paying attention to those things, then that just makes life hard. Screen spaces is worth going over, but I think this video is done. I think I'm at a lot of scope. We got some more stuff in UI to cover, but that's the basics. We got data out of a UI by just dragging and dropping a public function to call a button. On a button press to call a function, and that, whatever object we call that function, can have any of all the references we need to get data out of it. A button press. My undo button broke because I changed the. I think because I changed didn't set it in the prefab. It was only set in the. So the canvas prefab doesn't have those properties set. The manager's prefab has a canvas prefab object with those overrides in this prefab. Nested prefabs are complicated, and I still tend to avoid them. Okay, that should have fixed it. Oops. I mean, it's not a good Sokoban puzzle, but I can do it in 8 seconds. Oh, I've been blocking the timer. Well, or have I? Probably not. It's probably fine. Okay, bye.